Right now, somewhere in the Chinese city of Nanjing, a machine just watched a drone slip into restricted airspace, named its exact model, and raised the alarm in 1/10 of a second, 3 times faster than you can blink. That is not a movie effect, and it is not a projection of what might happen someday. That is a real, documented test result from a wireless network so different from the one sitting in your pocket right now that engineers have given it an entirely new name: 6G. For most of us, the word 6G just sounds like marketing, another number stacked onto the last one, the same way 5G sounded like a slightly faster version of 4G when it first showed up in headlines. But what is actually happening inside Chinese research labs right now is not a small upgrade. It is closer to swapping out the entire nervous system of how machines talk to each other. And if even half of what has already been tested makes it into everyday use, the way you drive, the way surgeons operate, and even the way a country defends its own airspace could look completely different within the next decade. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how this new kind of network works, using an analogy simple enough that you will never forget it. Why it might make today's fastest phone feel like a walkie-talkie within a few years, and whether China really has pulled far enough ahead to leave the rest of the world's 5G networks in the dust. We are going to walk through the real names, the real dates, and the real numbers behind this story, not vague promises about the future, because the specifics are exactly what make this so hard to believe. Here is the strangest part, and it is worth sitting with for a second. The network we are talking about is not just faster internet in the way you probably picture faster internet. It is being built to sense the world around it directly through the same signals it uses to carry your data, almost like it can feel changes in the air the way your skin feels a sudden breeze before you even see what caused it. We are going to get into exactly how that works in a moment, because it is the one piece of this story that separates 6G from every other phone upgrade you have ever heard about before. If stories like this genuinely grab you, the kind where a piece of engineering quietly rewrites what used to sound physically impossible, then sticking around and hitting subscribe means you will be here for the next one before it ever shows up anywhere else in your feed. That is not a demand, just an open invitation for anyone who gets a little bit obsessed watching the future get built piece by piece in real time, the same way you might be feeling right now. To understand why any of this counts as a breakthrough, you first need to understand why nobody managed to solve this problem before now, because the obstacles here were not small ones. Every single generation of wireless technology before this one ran headfirst into the exact same wall, over and over again, for almost 50 years. 2G let you send a text message and barely anything else. 3G let you load a slow, clunky web page if you were patient. 4G finally let you stream video without constant buffering, and it changed how an entire generation used their phones. 5G, the network most of us rely on today, pushed things further, making it possible for self-driving car prototypes and factory robots to exchange information with barely any noticeable delay. But every one of those upgrades ran into the same physical trap, and it is a trap rooted in basic physics, not just bad engineering. To send more data through the air, you generally need higher frequency radio waves, and higher frequency waves behave more like a whisper than a shout. They can carry far more detail packed into every second, but they do not travel nearly as far, and they get blocked shockingly easily by walls, heavy rain, thick fog, even something as simple as leaves on a tree in early autumn. Engineers spent decades essentially trading one problem for another, gaining speed while losing reach, or gaining reach while losing speed, and almost nobody thought you could really have both at once. That trade-off has quietly haunted wireless engineers for decades, and it only got harder as expectations grew. You could chase raw speed, or you could chase range and reliability, but stacking both at the same time felt nearly impossible, especially once engineers also wanted the network to keep working underwater, across open oceans, in remote deserts, and eventually even in orbit above the planet. On top of that purely physical challenge, there is a second, almost bureaucratic wall that is just as tough to climb. No single country, laboratory, or company gets to unilaterally decide how a new wireless generation gets built. The entire world eventually has to agree on one shared set of technical rules, called a standard, or a phone built in one country simply will not be able to talk to a cell tower built in another. Getting dozens of competing nations, telecom giants, and rival companies to agree on anything that technically complicated has historically taken the better part of a decade, sometimes longer, filled with negotiations, testing, and plenty of disagreement over whose patented ideas make it into the final rulebook. So the real question facing engineers was never simply, can we make wireless internet faster? The real question was always something much harder. Can we build a single network that is dramatically faster, that reaches almost everywhere on the planet, including places with zero towers at all, and that somehow becomes more efficient and more affordable as it grows, instead of collapsing under its own cost and complexity. For years, most experts inside the industry quietly assumed you had to pick two out of those three goals, and simply accept a compromise on the third. It is worth remembering, too, that China was not always ahead in this particular race. During the earlier rollout of 5G, American and European companies controlled a large share of the essential patents, and Chinese firms spent years playing catch-up, building factories and research labs almost from scratch just to close that gap. That history matters here, because it means the current lead in 6G research is not some lucky accident or a random head start. It is the direct result of a deliberate, government-backed strategy, built specifically to make sure the next generation of wireless technology does not repeat the exact same pattern. What has changed more recently, and where China is now claiming a genuinely serious head start over rivals in the United States, Europe, South Korea, and Japan, is exactly what we are about to break down step by step. Once you see how the pieces fit together, you will understand why so many engineers are calling this less of a simple upgrade and more of a redesign from the ground up. So how does this actually work in practice, stripped of the jargon? Think about how your phone connects to the internet right now, today, without you ever really thinking about it. Somewhere near you is a cell tower, and your phone quietly talks to whichever tower happens to be closest at any given moment. Kind of like walking through a large building where you always speak to the nearest security guard stationed at each doorway you pass through. The problem, the one that has frustrated network engineers for years, is that awkward moment in between towers, right at the fading edge of one guard's hearing range, and just before you step into range of the next one. That gap is exactly where phone calls drop, where video calls freeze mid-sentence, and where a car relying on a live connection could lose critical data at the worst possible moment. Engineers call this transition a handoff, and it has been a structural weak point in essentially every wireless network ever built. The new approach several Chinese research labs have been actively testing throws that entire guard at each doorway idea out completely. Instead of a handful of separate, expensive towers, each stubbornly guarding their own little patch of territory, imagine hundreds of small, cheap antennas spread evenly across an entire city, almost like streetlights lining every block rather than a few enormous floodlights placed far apart. Instead of competing for your phone's attention as you move around, all of those antennas quietly cooperate at once, working together more like a swarm of bees sharing one collective hive mind than like separate rival guards handing you off one at a time. There is no single tower you get formally handed off to anymore in this new design. Every nearby antenna quietly helps carry a small piece of your connection simultaneously. So as you physically move through a city, the invisible web of coverage around you shifts and rebalances itself constantly, without you ever noticing a single gap or dropout. Engineers have given this idea a fittingly simple name, cell-free architecture, because there are technically no more separate walled-off cells at all, just one continuous, shifting blanket of coverage stretched across the whole area. Let's break the whole system down into 4 clear steps you can actually picture in your head, the same way the engineers who built it had to picture it first. Step 1 is spreading many, small, inexpensive antennas everywhere across a city or an industrial site, instead of relying on a handful of expensive, oversized towers. The same basic logic behind why it is far easier to brightly light an entire dark room using many small bulbs scattered around, rather than a single, giant spotlight pointed from one corner. Step 2 is quietly connecting every one of those scattered antennas back to one shared artificial intelligence brain, a system that decides, moment by moment and almost instantly, exactly which nearby antennas should carry your particular signal and precisely how much power each one should use to do it efficiently. Step 3 folds in satellites that sit hundreds, or in some cases thousands, of kilometers above the surface of the Earth, so that places with absolutely no ground antennas at all, like the middle of the open ocean or a stretch of empty desert, still receive usable coverage bounced directly down from orbit. And step 4, which is genuinely the part that sounds almost too strange to be real, is teaching the entire network to sense its own physical surroundings using the very same radio waves it already uses to carry your ordinary data traffic. That is exactly how that testbed in Nanjing managed to spot an unauthorized drone in 1/10 of a second, without needing a completely separate radar system running alongside it at all. The communication system and the sensing system had essentially become the same system. Stack all 4 of those steps together in your head, and you stop getting something that is simply a faster version of your current phone connection. You start getting something that behaves much more like a nervous system stretched across an entire country, quietly sensing, constantly thinking, and reacting in something very close to real time. But bold claims like that only actually mean something if they are backed up by real organizations, real dates, and real verifiable numbers. So let's slow down and look closely at exactly who is building this and precisely when each piece came together. China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, commonly abbreviated as MIIT, the government body that oversees the entire national telecom industry, has been quietly steering this project for years through a dedicated group called the IMT 2030, or 6G, Promotion Group. In May of 2026, that same ministry formally approved trial use of the 6 GHz radio frequency band specifically set aside for 6G field testing, which finally opened the door for real physical prototype equipment to be tested out in the field rather than staying locked inside a laboratory. Then, on June 4th of 2026, the ministry went a significant step further and launched a nationwide ministry-to-province collaborative pilot program, inviting individual provinces and major cities across the entire country to select between 1 and 3 specific 6G research areas that best matched their own local industries, whether that meant advanced manufacturing, maritime shipping, or precision sensing, with a stated national goal of producing genuinely usable technology and consumer-facing products by the year 2029. The cell-free testbed described a moment ago is not some vague hypothetical concept either, and it is worth naming exactly who built it. It came out of Purple Mountain Laboratories, a dedicated communications research institute physically based in the city of Nanjing, and according to their own publicly reported test results, the system delivered at least 10 times the effective range, 10 times the network capacity, and 10 times the spectrum efficiency compared to a standard modern 5G network, with spectrum efficiency simply meaning how much usable data you can squeeze through the exact same narrow slice of radio frequency. China Mobile, the single largest mobile carrier on the entire planet by raw number of subscribers, has also been deeply active in this space since February 3rd of 2024, when it partnered with the Innovation Academy for Microsatellites at the Chinese Academy of Sciences to successfully launch a dedicated low-orbit satellite built specifically to test 6G network architecture directly from space. On the intellectual property side of this story, the numbers get even more specific and, frankly, a little startling. An industry report cited by China's own state news agency found that as of June 2025, Chinese companies, universities, and research institutions collectively held approximately 40.3% of all 6G-related patents filed anywhere in the world, more than any other single country by a wide margin. Owning that many patents on paper does not automatically guarantee a country wins the broader technology race, since holding a clever idea in a filing cabinet is a very different thing from turning that idea into a reliable product millions of ordinary people can actually buy and use every day. But a concentration of intellectual property at that scale still shows you, in very concrete terms, just how much money, talent, and raw manpower has already been quietly poured into this effort behind the scenes for years. So the pieces clearly exist on paper, in government policy documents, and in patent filing databases, but has any of it genuinely worked outside the controlled walls of a laboratory? That specific question is exactly where this story stops sounding theoretical and starts getting a lot more convincing, because the proof already exists in the real world, not just in projections. In November of 2025, at that very same test site in Nanjing, engineers ran a live, working demonstration where their sensing-enabled 6G system successfully detected an unauthorized drone flying nearby, correctly identified its specific make and model, and displayed its key characteristics directly on a monitoring screen for the engineers watching, all within roughly 1/10 of a second, which is exactly the number this video opened with at the very start. That result is not a simulation, and it is not a rounded-up estimate meant to sound impressive. It is a documented outcome from an actual functioning prototype system that was physically operating that day. Separately, and around the same broad window of time, China Telecom teamed up directly with researchers from Tsinghua University, widely regarded as one of the country's very top engineering schools, to test a satellite-based communication link specifically designed to serve some of the most physically difficult places on Earth to keep connected, the polar regions near the North and South Poles, and the vast, empty stretches of open ocean where absolutely no cell tower will ever realistically be built. Using a satellite orbiting roughly 20,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, the joint team achieved a peak download speed of 140 megabits per second delivered directly to an ordinary user's device, which is genuinely fast enough to stream high-definition video without interruption, proving in a real physical test that a usable 6G-era connection could realistically reach a cargo ship crossing the middle of the Pacific Ocean or an isolated research station stationed near the South Pole, not merely a busy street in the middle of a major city. And then there is the laser link result, which might be the single most eye-catching number in this entire story. A private Chinese company called Changguang Satellite Technology, which operates the Jilin-1 constellation, currently recognized as the world's largest commercial network of high-resolution imaging satellites at a total of 117 individual spacecraft, publicly announced that it achieved a data transmission rate of 100 gigabits per second between a truck-mounted ground station and one of its satellites orbiting overhead. That figure is roughly 10 times faster than the very same company's own previous speed record, and it was achieved using a focused laser beam instead of traditional radio signals to physically move that data through the air, which happens to be part of what future 6G-level satellite links are broadly expected to eventually rely on at scale. If a single isolated test can already move data 10 times faster than the previous record set just months earlier, stop and think for a second about what happens once all of these separate breakthroughs, the split-second sensing, the polar satellite links, and the cell-free ground networks, eventually get properly combined into one single unified working system instead of remaining scattered across different labs and different companies. That combined version is precisely what China's national pilot program is now actively trying to build. Zoom out for a moment now and think seriously about what all of this actually adds up to once you stop looking at each individual test result on its own. This is not simply a race to give ordinary people faster video calls or quicker app downloads, although that outcome will absolutely still be part of it somewhere down the line. A network that can genuinely sense its own surroundings and react within a tenth of a second starts to open the door to things that sound a lot closer to science fiction than a routine telecom upgrade, like a highly trained surgeon sitting in a hospital in Beijing, carefully guiding a robotic surgical instrument operating on a patient hundreds of kilometers away, with so little delay in the connection that it genuinely feels like the surgeon's own hands are physically present in that distant operating room. It could also mean cars that no longer simply follow painted lane markings on the road, but instead constantly sense every nearby vehicle, every pedestrian, and every obstacle around them directly through the surrounding network itself, reacting instantly to sudden changes faster than any human driver realistically ever could. It also carries a genuinely massive geopolitical stake sitting quietly underneath all of the technical details. Whichever country's technology ultimately gets built into the eventual global 6G standard does not just earn simple bragging rights among engineers. Every single phone, every antenna, and every chip manufactured anywhere in the world to meet that agreed-upon standard will likely need to license patents from whichever companies and countries hold them, in exactly the same way countries and companies around the globe already routinely pay licensing fees tied to earlier wireless generations that came before this one. That basic economic reality is precisely why the United States, the European Union, South Korea, and Japan are all simultaneously racing to develop and patent their own competing 6G breakthroughs at the exact same time, and why this quiet, highly technical competition is really, underneath the surface, a much bigger competition over who ultimately gets paid and who gets to set the rules for the next 20 years of global communication technology. It helps to see this against what other countries are doing at the same time, because China is not working in a vacuum. In the United States, companies and universities are pouring money into higher frequency research through government-funded programs, betting heavily on speed over the kind of nationwide sensing network China is prioritizing. South Korea, which was among the very first countries to launch commercial 5G, has set its own aggressive 6G research targets and is investing heavily in chip development to avoid depending on outside suppliers. The European Union has pooled funding from multiple member states into joint 6G research projects, hoping that combining resources across borders can make up for the fact that no single European country can match China's scale on its own. None of these efforts are further behind out of laziness or lack of talent. They simply reflect different bets on which pieces of this puzzle matter most, and the country that bets correctly stands to shape how the entire world connects for the next 2 decades. China has publicly set a target of beginning commercial 6G rollout around the year 2030, with the International Telecommunication Union, the global body that governs shared wireless standards for every country on Earth, expected to finalize the official technical rulebook that everyone will eventually follow around that same general timeframe. If that ambitious timeline actually holds up under pressure, the network capable of quietly reshaping surgery, driving, and even national drone security might genuinely arrive faster than most casual observers currently expect. But how realistic is that particular timeline, and what specific obstacles could still knock the entire project off track before it gets there? Because here is the honest, balanced part of this story, the part that plenty of flashy tech channels conveniently choose to skip entirely. None of what you just heard described in detail is a finished, polished, commercially available product that you personally can walk into a store and buy today. There is no final, agreed-upon global 6G standard yet, and until the International Telecommunication Union formally locks that standard down, competing incompatible versions of this technology developed independently by different countries genuinely risk splitting the world into separate wireless zones, not entirely unlike the way electrical wall outlets already differ frustratingly from country to country. Every single specific result described in this video, the split-second drone detection, the deep space satellite speed test, and the record-breaking laser link, came directly from a prototype system or a limited regional pilot program, not from a fully built network that ordinary people can simply walk outside and connect to right now. There are real, unresolved technical gaps standing in the way too, and Chinese researchers themselves have been refreshingly open about naming them publicly. Professor Zhang Ping from Beijing University of Posts and Telecommunications has pointed out that critical vulnerabilities still remain buried inside core hardware components and the foundational software that would eventually need to run a full-scale, nationwide 6G network reliably. He has also highlighted a genuine shortage of engineers skilled enough to manage a technology this complex, one that simultaneously blends advanced communications theory, artificial intelligence, aerospace engineering, and cutting-edge materials science all at the exact same time. Professor Zhang has described this current period as the stage of building the framework and creating the working prototype, which is a very different, far less mature thing than reliably mass manufacturing millions of affordable working devices ready for ordinary consumers. There are bigger questions sitting beyond the pure engineering challenges as well, questions that money and patents alone cannot simply solve. A network deliberately built to sense drones, moving vehicles, and potentially even people passing through physical space raises genuinely serious privacy and security questions that no government has fully and publicly answered yet. Turning an everyday communications network into something that functions closer to a nationwide sensing system is undeniably powerful. But any tool that powerful built at a national scale always deserves careful public scrutiny over exactly who ultimately controls that sensing data, and precisely how it ends up being used once collected. A technology this genuinely capable will not just need better chips and faster antennas going forward, it will also need clear, publicly understood rules. So where does all of this honestly leave us at the end? China has already built real, physically working prototypes that hit specific numbers most experts would have confidently called impossible just a handful of years ago. A tenth of a second drone detection running live. A satellite link successfully streaming usable data from 20,000 kilometers straight up in orbit. And a focused laser connection moving raw data 10 times faster than the previous world record. None of it adds up to a finished, fully commercial network just yet, and the honest, open race toward that 2030 target remains genuinely wide open, with billions of dollars, several more years of rigorous testing, and a still unwritten global standard all standing firmly between today's impressive prototypes and tomorrow's ordinary, everyday reality. If this kind of deep, detailed dive into how tomorrow's technology actually gets built behind the scenes is the kind of thing you find yourself wanting more of, then simply liking this video genuinely helps it reach other curious people who would likely enjoy it every bit as much as you just did. And subscribing with notifications turned on means you will be among the very first to know the moment a story quite like this one breaks again. Here is the question I would genuinely love to read your honest answer to down in the comments below. If a wireless network could sense everything physically happening around you just as clearly and instantly as it connects your calls and messages, what is the very first thing you would personally want that network to notice or protect you from before anything else?